Hey, everybody. Hi. All right, so we're not post-lunch, and it's not yet like we're falling asleep at 4 o'clock, so I feel like we've hit the right groove. I'm really excited about this topic, and I'm so deeply grateful that I get to do this today. So welcome to Empower, Engage, Excel, Transforming Client Relationships in the Law. This was a really special talk that I got to be a part of, and so I'm deeply grateful that Zane agreed to put up with me to do this. So first thing that I want to do, of course, is say a huge thank you to our innovator exhibiting partners that are here with us today, and of course, our visionary exhibiting partners. Huge thanks to them for letting us make CleoCon happen. So huge thanks to them. But I did want to take a quick moment and introduce Zane. I had him send me some notes, and I've just been very, very impressed by getting to know who he is, not only as a practitioner, but also as a human being. And so I want to be able to share that with you all. So Zane is the founder of MZA Legal, which is a virtual law firm empowering the next generation of entrepreneurs. He focuses on helping solopreneurs build a solid foundation for the future growth of their businesses. And prior to launching his firm, Zane was the managing attorney of Philadelphia Lawyers for Social Equity. And he was helping close to 2,000 Philadelphians escape the stigma of criminal records through the expungement process, which I have been through and is not always easy, and can make a huge difference in folks' lives. Beyond being a lawyer, Zane is a mediator, a former college athlete, a military spouse, and occasionally a wedding officiant. I'm going to have questions. And in addition, of course, to being a husband and a father to 2 little ones, he's most proud of his work in the community, having launched several initiatives to support at-risk youth, including the Empowered Youth Entrepreneurs. And of course, lastly, it's worth noting that he is going through what I would consider to be a midlife crisis, and just finished his first half marathon, which is very impressive. And of course, we hope that crisis continues, because he is hoping to do a full marathon. So the crisis continues, of course. But with that, I'll actually hand it over to you, Zane.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. And thank you, everyone, for coming out this afternoon. Definitely a pleasure to be with everyone and talk about, what I think is a really important topic when it comes to centering our clients. I'm assuming that everyone in here is a legal professional, at least for the most part. And so just by a quick show of hands, for those of you who are up here in the front, who I can actually see because the lights are so bright, I can't necessarily see everyone in the back, but just by a show of hands, how many of you went into the legal profession because you wanted to help people? Just curious. Okay. A lot of hands. I kind of expected that. All right. How many of you went into the legal profession because you wanted to make a lot of money or have the status? And it's okay if it's both.
Yeah, don't lie.
It's okay.
Okay,
it's okay. No one's judging. I can be honest. For me, it was definitely both. I knew I wanted to help people, but I also wanted to own a Beamer one day. That was my dream car. And so still working on the Beamer. I'll probably have to put that off now that I have 2 little ones, raisins and Nutri-Grain bars all in the seat. Probably not a good idea with a Beamer. But, I went into the legal field without much knowledge about what lawyers actually do. And so I knew I had an idea of what I wanted to do, but I never had any idea that I'd end up where I'm at now, running a virtual law firm. I'm licensed in Pennsylvania. I live out in Hawaii because, as Jessica mentioned, I'm a military spouse. I love what I do, and I think that the one experience that sticks out to me in terms of being most game-changing for me in terms of the journey that I've been on is getting into law school and having everyone, friends and family, reach out to me with their legal questions before I'd even pass the class. So it was almost like when I posted that acceptance letter into law school, everyone saw that and thought it was an engagement agreement. And so, grandmom's reaching out. She wants me to put the house in trust so she can avoid probate. My old high school teammate is like, I need help with this custody and custody issue, and my cousin's reaching out, and she's like, I think there's a raccoon or something in the ceiling, and the landlord's not doing anything about it. Do I have to pay rent this month? I'm like, you guys, I'm really not the person that you want to be turning to for advice in this situation. I haven't passed the class, let alone the bar exam. I don't think I can help you. But the reason why, this experience was so, I think, stuck out to me so much was it really helped me to realize and kind of uncovered a couple things kind of early on in my journey in my legal career. One is that the legal industry is broken. And I think that this might sound like an overstatement to at least some of you, if not many of you. But for me, it was just so eye-opening that everyone would reach out to me as a first-year law student, and knowing that I didn't know anything, that I really did not have the ability to answer their questions, and even telling them, I can't do this for you, and them still saying, but I want you to try. Go ahead, try. Help me. I need help. And so the fact that they would turn to me rather than calling a lawyer, whether it's, looking through the yellow pages or, obviously Google, whatever the case may be, the fact that they would turn to me rather than someone who actually had the expertise that they needed, showed me that there was something wrong with the legal industry. But it also showed me that on the flip side of that coin, there were opportunities, right? And that for those of us within the profession who are willing to be bold enough to innovate, there's an opportunity there to get that beamer. So, really, this provides the context for the conversation that, I want to have this afternoon around, in an increasingly competitive legal marketplace, those of us at small firms, those of us who are solos, how can we really transform that client relationship, improve client satisfaction, and really just stand out from the crowd. And I think that that's the key to this conversation today. And where I really want to start is by distinguishing the difference between client experience and client satisfaction, because I think a lot of times we kind of use these terms interchangeably. I think the best way to kind of illustrate this is with a story. So for me growing up, one of the real treats, that my parents would, kind of take us to Red Lobster. And I know these days, like, Red Lobster gets a bad rap, it's like going through, potential bankruptcy. I'm not keeping up fully with it, but Red Lobster was a real treat. Like, that was like fine dining for me as a kid, because, seafood's expensive, so I get to have crab or shrimp, maybe get a lobster tail. Like, that's a real treat. And those Cheddar Bay biscuits, man, I still go crazy for those, right?
Please keep one open.
Oh,
biscuits.
They have to. Well, you can get the biscuit mix, which I figured out. You can make them at home. It's not quite the same, but
It never will be.
No. But so to me, that experience was so special. Now that I'm older, I have my own money. I can spend it how I want to. And I've also, met other people, had other experiences. I've realized that obviously Red Lobster is not fine dining. I still love it. I still enjoy the food, but it's not as special to me, right? And so the experience has changed, or the experience actually has not changed, right? It's essentially the same menu, same decor. Everything about Red Lobster is essentially the same, but how I, process that experience, how satisfied I am with it at the end of the day has changed. And so the difference really between the two comes in with expectations, right? Customer experience refers to the customer journey, and it really encompasses everything that you do to serve the client's needs. Whereas customer satisfaction is really just a measure of how effective you've been at meeting the client's expectations. So it's the client's expectations in addition to the overall experience that you're providing that's ultimately going to determine, how satisfied the client is with the experience. And there's I found this while I was kind of preparing, I found this sort of visual way of conceptualizing, or this equation for conceptualizing what this looks like. And I want to make sure that I get this professor's name right. I believe his name is Professor Mark Campeau. I might be butchering that, but from Clarkson University, who, came up with this idea, this equation, again, to help us visually conceptualize what this looks like. But essentially, it's just a really easy way to think about, how we get to client satisfaction, right? It's the experience minus the expectations equals the satisfaction. So like if we're just plugging random numbers in there, my expectations at Red Lobster, maybe used to be a 5, now it's an 8. And so the satisfaction that I get out of the experience at the end of the day is different. Another great example that I can think of, when we take my 3.5-year-old to go see a movie, my expectations are relatively low. I'm not expecting that, like, whatever cartoon movie it is, that I'm really going to enjoy it or really just be like riveted by it. So when we go to see that movie and I'm like laughing throughout the entire movie, that expectation that was a 3, when I get that experience that's like an 8, I really enjoy that movie versus like, maybe a movie where I'm really excited to see it. I have high expectations and it doesn't quite meet that expectation, right? And I'm a little bit less satisfied with the overall experience. So it's important, again, to point this out, because at the end of the day, when it comes to improving client satisfaction, it's not always about doing more. Sometimes it might just be about better setting or managing client expectations so that we can exceed that bar, right? So that we can get over it. And sometimes it might even mean doing less. I mean, that might be the situation where you're, doing more of the things that don't matter, and maybe it's about focusing on more of the things that do, or less of the things that do. So at the end of the day as well, when it comes to client expectations, the only way that you're really going to understand what your clients expect, what they need, is by asking them. And I think it's important to point this out, because a lot of times we make assumptions. We have a lot of experience, both obviously within our practice area and what we do within the legal system, but we have a lot of experience working with our clients as well and helping them navigate their problems. And sometimes that leads us to kind of assume what they want or what they need from us. And it's important for us to constantly be checking in with our clients in terms of what are they looking for, what are they expecting, and really just making a habit out of gathering client perspectives and client feedback. And so, I'm not necessarily like an expert on like client psychology and that sort of thing. But I did want to kind of go through and just share some of the things that I do in terms of gathering client feedback and working that into, systems and processes that I find helpful. Number one, and I think on a most basic level, is Net Promoter Score. And Net Promoter Score is really just a easy, simple, well-researched and known effective way to quantify what your clients are experiencing or what their satisfaction level is, right? So for those of you who aren't familiar with Net Promoter Score, essentially you're asking your client, how likely are you to recommend us to a friend, or how likely are you to recommend us to a colleague? And it's out of a scale of either 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. Folks who are on a 5 or a 9 to 10 on that scale are the folks who are promoting you. They really love what you did, and they're going to, spread the news about you through word of mouth. The folks on the other side of that spectrum, when someone asks about you, they're the ones who are likely to say, stay away from that person or stay away from that firm. I didn't find them too helpful, right? And so Net Promoter Score is a really easy way to gauge client satisfaction and just figure out on a basic level, am I meeting my clients' needs? Am I meeting their expectations? Am I exceeding those expectations? Because that's ultimately what you want to be able to do. And I think as well, in terms of creating a process, right, where you're asking for this information, you're gathering this information in a systematic way. What I do is I use Lawmatic. So within that system, I have a document template for my closing letters. I have a template for the email that goes out with that closing letter. And then so when a matter is over, I tend to work on a project by project basis with my clients. So when the matter is over, I take the 5 to 10 minutes to just fill in that template with the information that's relevant to the client. I send it out, and there's a link in that email, where folks can go to a form, and the first question is that Net Promoter Score, right? How likely are you to recommend us to someone else? And so, that's, again, just a really easy way to gauge client satisfaction. In addition to that, and similarly along the same lines, are online surveys and forms, right? So the process here can look very similar in terms of, for me, it's sending out a 6-question survey. And essentially what that email says is, hey, thank you for choosing MZA Legal. We really enjoyed working with you. Hope that you'll consider us a part of your team moving forward. Here's a closing letter closing out your matter, handling or addressing any, continuing issues or things that you need to be aware of. Also, I really pride myself on providing a 5-star experience to all of our clients. Can you take 60 seconds to fill out this 6-question survey and let us know how we did, right? Not everyone's going to fill it out, but over time you build up enough of that feedback to where it becomes helpful, and you can kind of see, trends start to emerge, right? The other 5 questions in that survey are asking for qualitative information that kind of helps fill in the picture around that client satisfaction score, right? So I'm asking questions like, what did you enjoy most about the experience of working with us? What could we have done to improve upon that experience? Questions like, did we help you find clarity in terms of the things that you were looking for? And I'll also send out these sorts of surveys after a consultation with a prospective client as well, because I really want to kind of gauge, not only are you satisfied, but, what was it that really, helped us get above that line and kind of meet and exceed your expectations. Another method that I like to use is client interviews, right? And so there are a couple different ways to think about, client interviews and collecting information. I think overall, when it comes to client interviews, are a really great way to kind of delve deeper into trends that you may be seeing from the surveys or the forms that you're sending out, right? So if you're seeing something in particular, you're continuing to see, a pattern emerge. Clients are asking for one thing in particular, or they're saying that they're having a particular issue. A client interview is a great way to kind of talk to a subset of your clients and get some more deeper information and intel into like what's actually going on and how can you actually address whatever it is that they might be needing, right? And so I think a lot of times it's helpful to have someone else other than the attorney, if you're a solo, someone other than you, actually conducting the interview, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to get the positive feedback as well as the negative feedback, right? So, the client, some clients don't have any problem telling you about yourself, right? Other clients are a little bit more hesitant to do so. And so having someone, whether it is someone who's on the administrative side of things, or, for me, I love to make great use of interns. I'm a true solo, so I don't have anyone kind of working with me. And so, when I have an intern, this might be a task that I kind of task them with if I'm seeing something that I want to gain some more insight into. But, that makes it a little bit easier, hopefully, for the client to feel comfortable to kind of share that information that, might not be too positive, but that gives you an opportunity to figure out how you might be able to improve. The other thing that I'll say about client interviews as well, 2 other things to say about client interviews. One is that remember that the intake process is an interview process as well, and it's also a process that is that you can use to collect information about the overall picture and the overall client journey that extends beyond the client just working with you, right? So before the client came to you, what did they try to do to solve the problem? What does it look like to them to actually solve the problem, right? Like, what does an actual solution look like to them? Out of the things that they tried, what worked, what didn't, and why, right? These are things that you can gather information and intel on that helps you get a broader picture of how your clients are coming to you and what they're really looking for that they're not finding elsewhere. And the other thing that I want to say about client interviews, that makes them so great, is that you actually get the client's perspective in their own words, which again goes back to, I think a lot of times, like, again, because we have the experience, we've kind of been there, we've done that, we've helped a lot of clients through things. That client interview is an opportunity to check back in with how the client sees the problem, how they view the issue, and how they understand, kind of the context in which they sit in terms of their circumstances. So client interviews can be a really great tool for gathering feedback from your clients. And then last but not least is just being observant around client behavior. I was actually talking to my dad last night on the phone because I was like, my son is giving my wife some problems back home. He's just got a lot of energy, not a bad kid, but just like, attention span is like that. And so, I was talking to my dad and I was telling him, and then we got to just talking about a lot of different things. Somehow we ended up just on the topic of how, folks can tell you one thing, and I don't really understand how we got from that to this, but if you really want to understand what folks are thinking and what they're feeling, you have to look at their actions, right? They can be telling you one thing while their actions are telling you something different, right? So your clients may be saying, oh, the experience was great, I loved it, but maybe they're not coming back to you when they have additional issues, right? And is that because, they don't want to work with you? Is it because they're just not thinking to reach out to you, or maybe they don't understand that whatever it is that they might be dealing with later on down the line after you've already helped them is something that, they can come back to you for help with again. Or another, example of this, in my practice is kind of just looking at, how do folks really just, what questions are they asking at different parts of the process that maybe, it's like everyone is asking the same question, right? So maybe I need to include this in the email that I send out at a certain point in the process to say, hey, here's what you can expect. Or, for example, for a client who's like, they want me to draft a contract for them, how long is this process going to take? Making sure that in the email that I send out initially, hey, this is how long I expect the process to take. Here's how many drafts we're probably going to go through, et cetera, right? So really making sure that I'm laying out to them, like, here's what the process looks like, so that they can answer some of those questions on their own without having to give me a phone call and have me kind of give them an update or assuage any fears and concerns that they might have, right? So through all of that, and being a former athlete, I like analogize everything to sports. So these are like our keys to victory when it comes to implementing these pieces of, these different approaches to collecting feedback. Again, number one is just making sure that you're taking a systematic approach, right? So that you're really almost creating a habit out of collecting feedback. And the benefit here is that, like, having a process, having a system for going about collecting feedback, number one, is going to make the process more efficient. Number two, it's going to turn it into something that you can delegate to someone else, so that you can focus on other things. But number three, and maybe most important, is it's going to make that data and that information more helpful and more useful to you, right? If you're conducting client interviews and in one interview you're asking, the questions one way, and in another interview you're asking them a different way, the way that you ask or the way that you word those questions is ultimately going to impact the feedback that you're receiving, right? And so you want to make sure that you're being consistent across the board with, in that example, how you ask questions, or if it's a survey, when you send that survey out, so on and so forth, so that you can make sure that you're also, that consistency that you're, with which you're getting that feedback is also lending to making sure that you're not having an unintentional impact on the feedback that you're getting. Second is leveraging technology to save time, right? So, I was down on the exhibitor floor yesterday, and I'm always amazed. I like to think that I do a pretty good job of, like, keeping up with legal tech. And, like, I'm always amazed when I, like, come to conferences like CleoCon, and it's just like, I've never heard of you before. I've never seen you. Okay, there's this, there's that, like, I never think that I'm going to leave here, like, with a few meetings set up with folks who want to sell me new legal technology, but I always do. And I'm never, like, too upset about it. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of different technology tools out there to really help you automate these different processes, right? So if we're talking about being systematic with it, building this into our processes, whether it's electronic forms, email templates, process automation, so that, when you can have a pipeline where you move the client through the pipeline, and when you put them in one piece of the pipeline, maybe the email or the document just goes out automatically, right? Or when they fill in a form on your website, an engagement agreement and an invoice go out automatically after your system runs like a conflict check, right? And if the conflict check pops up something possible, there's possibly a conflict here, it sends you a notice so you can go in. There's just so many different things that you can do with the technology to be able to make the process more efficient and really just multiply your output. So really take the time. I know a lot of times it feels like it's a lot of effort to try to implement these different types of technology into your firm, especially if you're a solo. I know that struggle, but it is worth it at the end of the day to save yourself some time down the road. And then be comfortable reading between the lines from time to time, right? I know I said that, we want to gather the feedback so that we're sort of challenging our assumptions and making sure that we're getting, understanding things from the client's perspective, but also trust your intuition, right? We're all experienced, some of us might be newer, but we all have experience, right? We all have a level of expertise that lends us to being able to sort of, like, read between the lines and really understand what the client is telling us or what we're observing when it comes to the client's behavior and such. So, and I'm sorry, I have an alarm going off on my phone. I forgot to turn that off. That's my alarm that I set to go pick my son up from daycare. So, got to make sure I'm on time for that.
Fun intersection of work and home.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, definitely. And we have a newborn. He's 5 months. So it's like I have to be there on time because I send him there with 2 bottles. And if I get there and, it's like he has to eat in 5 minutes, they're looking. Time bomb. Yeah, they're like looking at me like, okay, Dad, he's got to eat in 5 minutes. I'm like, I know. But so sorry about that. But so feel comfortable to some extent reading between the lines, right? We want to get information that's going to give us more clarity, that's going to help fill in the gaps in the overall picture in terms of the client's perspective. But no information is going to be perfect. It's not about being perfect. It's about improvement and being a little bit better and figuring out how we can continue to improve upon those processes so we can continue to improve upon client satisfaction. So in case you haven't noticed, I enjoy telling stories. And so when I was thinking about, how do I kind of bring all of this together and bring it home, I didn't want to kind of just sit here and try to tell you all, like, here are some different ideas that you can kind of here are some things that you might be able to do in your practice to improve client experience, manage expectations, and ultimately improve client satisfaction, especially because I really only know what I do in terms of my practice area and the work that I do and what works for me as a solo practitioner. I don't know what it's like, working within a smaller firm with some employees or a mid-sized firm or even in different practice areas, right? So I'm sure some of you are personal injury or family law or bankruptcy, right? Just across the board, a lot of different experiences and just a lot of different circumstances. So I figured probably the best thing for me to do would just be to, tell a couple of stories of lessons that I've learned and things that I've experienced when it comes to implementing client feedback, managing expectations and just ultimately providing a good overall client experience and hope that maybe it sparks something for all of you in terms of ideas. And then, after we go through these, different lessons that I've learned, kind of just open it up to just an open discussion and some questions. So, the first lesson brings me back to my first experience as a lawyer working at Philadelphia Lawyers for Social Equity. And as Jessica mentioned, I was doing criminal record expungement work. So really it's, just helping people to overcome the stigma that they faced as a result of having a past criminal record. And we would do intake through expungement clinics. When I say this was a small nonprofit, I mean really small. Like when I joined the organization, it was me and the managing attorney who was the founder of the organization, and that was it. We were the only 2, full-time employees, filing, close to 3,000 expungements a year in Philadelphia. And so we were far exceeding, kind of our, just the impact far exceeded kind of the resources that we had. But I really just stepped into a situation where they had so many different systems in place. And I was so lucky to kind of learn and kind of see how they had set things up. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was the way in which they really used intake, one as an opportunity to empower clients and potential clients, but also as an opportunity to gather more information and perspective to figure out how we could be better advocates on behalf of our clients, both on an individual level, but also from a group perspective, right? Advocating on a higher level to increase access to different avenues for people to be able to, come back from having a criminal record, right? So one of the questions we would ask during intake was, how has this record affected you? And kind of what has your experience been like through, having a criminal record? And one of the things that we noticed is that folks would often mention sort of, not in these exact words, but they would often just talk about going through processes and feeling like they had no opportunity to be heard. And that was from the start of, being arrested, and going through the court process all the way till, they're getting denied for a job, right? You think about it, a lot of times in the court process, it might be they met with their lawyer, for 10 minutes, talked about the situation, and then decided that it would be best for them to take a plea, right? Even though they're not really getting an opportunity to be heard or go into court, talk to the judge, say what actually happened. or, at the end of the day, after years and years of having this criminal record, they're being denied for jobs that they're overqualified for. And they're not even having an opportunity to really explain, here's what happened, right? And we're talking about situations too, where like someone might've just been arrested. It might've been like they were the wrong person, they fit the description, but the judge went ahead and dismissed the case, and they still have this arrest record, and companies are just denying them for employment just because they see a record and don't understand what it really means, right? And so, we kind of took that to mean that, one of the things that our clients needed from us was an opportunity to be heard and an opportunity to be seen beyond what the record represented, right? So one of the things we would do during our expungement clinics is turn it into like an empowering experience, right? So I would, give a talk, and one of the things that I would say at the beginning is I would go through and I'd say, raise your hand if you are a mother, a father. Raise your hand if you're a veteran. Raise your hand if you do work in your community, right? If you volunteer in your community. Okay, now raise your hand if any of that would show up on your criminal record, right? And no one would raise their hand at that point. And it's just helping people to kind of remember, right? This record is not who you are, right? Everyone is treating you like what's on this piece of paper is who you are, but there's so much more to you. And so today is all about helping you to take that back, right? Take back your personal history. Another example of how we would use that is, we would go into court, and especially in the criminal court context, folks really don't have a lot of times don't feel like they have the opportunity to be heard through that process. And so even in situations where maybe the district attorney's office would say, Your Honor, we actually want to withdraw our objection to this expungement petition. We're perfectly fine with it moving forward. I might say, Your Honor, I appreciate that. We would like to take maybe just 60 seconds to still tell you about, what my client has been up to in the past 10 years and why this expungement is so important to them. And one that meant a lot to our clients to show like, hey, we're willing to stand here and, make sure that the court hears what you've been up to and recognizes you as a full person. But it was also important to me because I recognize, I'm going to be in front of this judge. I'm in front of this judge on Monday. I'm going to be back in front of him or her on Thursday. I'm going to be back in front of them a couple times next week. So I want the judge to be able to understand like what this means to our clients, right, at the end of the day, and kind of get the judge to kind of understand and see the full picture, right? So understand that customer journey begins before the engagement agreement is signed, and that there's opportunities for you to, gather information through that intake process, but also really impress upon your clients what you're all about, and potential clients what you're all about just from the very beginning in that first contact. Another lesson that I learned really early on after going out on my own is that, your clients can tell you what they want, but it's really up to you to connect the dots and figure out how you translate that into something that is meaningful or delivers value for them. So how I learned this was, when I went out on my own, I wanted to kind of fill the access to justice gap. I thought, naively that was something that I could do on my own. And so I was like, I'm going to be the attorney that everyone turns to, when they need advice, whatever it might be. And, I'm going to be affordable and relatable, and that's kind of going to be like my selling point, right? And, what I kind of found through that, and I actually, what happened is I had a friend who was, I think he was getting his MBA in like organizational psychology or something along those lines. And he's like, hey, you just started this firm. I have a project that I have to do for my MBA program in order to, and what I need to do is essentially do like a 360 analysis for a company, either for their, some of their employees or some of their clients. Do you think I could interview some of your clients? And I'm like, yeah, and you're not going to charge me? I'll take that. Had them interview some of my clients, and some of the feedback that I got from those early clients was, Zane did a good job, but I really wish that, he would have provided like a little bit more overall context about my situation, right? He helped me get from A to B, but now I need to know like, do I want to go to C next, or do I want to go to D next, or do I want to go to E next, or do I want to go to F? And what does that look like? And how do I kind of decide between, where I go from here, right? And because I was spreading myself over a number of different practice areas, like I kind of tried a little bit of everything. Some Some of it was working as a contract attorney with other attorneys. Some of it was on my own with, having mentors kind of help me through some of those things. But, because I was trying to do so many different things and I had only done criminal record clearing before, I didn't have like all of the expertise to help them. Like once I've got you to A to B, okay, now like, where do I go from here? Tell me more about, kind of where I'm at now. It's like, okay, give me maybe a couple of weeks and, here's what I would charge you to do some extra research, right? And so for clients, it was kind of like, it would be helpful if he, kind of guided me through what those next steps would look like. And so what I gathered from that is, okay, I need to niche down, right? I need to focus on one thing because, there are other ways, right, for me to gain that expertise. Maybe I take a course, maybe I, only take on certain cases or certain matters where I can work with another attorney who's kind of overseeing me, whatever the case may be. There are a lot of different kind of options to kind of give the clients what they were asking for in this situation, which was expertise, which is what they really wanted from me. But I ultimately said, okay, I need to niche down, and that'll be a good way for me to develop that expertise quicker, and make sure that I put myself in a position where I can really just deliver that expertise that the clients are looking for. And so again, it was one of those situations where my clients didn't tell me like, you need to stop doing so much. But they said, we need the expertise. And I said, okay, how do I go about doing that? And niching down ended up being a good way for me to do that. And then last but not least, and I think this one's really important as well, is that any opportunity where you can add value for your clients without adding responsibilities for yourself, ongoing responsibilities for yourself or your team, is a win-win. And in my context, in my practice, the way I sort of figured this out was, I started out by doing a lot of workshops, and that was my way to get in front of entrepreneurs. So I would do workshops with community organizations. I started out, I think, with the local chapter of SCORE, doing workshops on just keeping yourself legal, right? So kind of covering all the nuts and bolts of the legal aspect. And this was, valuable for me in a number of different ways. One, I was, like I said, getting in front of my prospective audience, new business owners, so on and so forth. It was also valuable from the perspective of gathering client perspective, right? So the questions that folks would ask me throughout that workshop or at the end of the workshop was an opportunity for me to see, okay, what are they really wondering? How can I help to answer these questions? Meet folks where they are and make sure that, I'm positioning myself as an authority and as the best person to help them solve their problems. But it also led to me creating a lot of just different resources, right? Because these workshops and the, little checklists that I would hand out with them, or the little guides, or the one sheet of information that I would give at the end of it, it took some time to create that, right? But once it was created, it was there, and I could use it for a lot of different things, right? So I could take that, checklist or that guide that I created, I could slap it on my website as a, something to generate leads. I could, take the workshop that I've created and go to another organization and say, hey, I've got this workshop. I think that it would be really helpful for, your folks, and, establishing myself as an authority within my geographic area. And, getting to the point where, organizations were actually willing to pay me to give these workshops rather than just doing them for free. And over the years, I've created so many different resources that now I'm actually in a position where working on developing a platform that essentially acts as a resource hub for clients and potential clients, right? Where, especially for the folks who reach out and, they're like, oh, I want you to file a trademark. How much? Oh, okay. Thank you. I think I'll be reaching back out to you, right? But so for those folks, right, who maybe reach out and, for me, they might not be ready to work with a lawyer, it becomes a place where they can access the information for a subscription fee. And it also brings them into my orbit, and, where they can kind of build a relationship with the brand of the brand that my firm has. And so when they're ready to work with an attorney, I'm the first person that they want to talk to, right? And so it's I can use all of those different resources. That's one way that I can use them. But if you're creating and turning your knowledge into essentially products, it gives you an opportunity there where you can sort of reuse that stuff again and again and again in different ways. And again, whether it's workshops or handouts or whatever the case may be, These are all things that you can kind of sort of reuse and create a win-win situation where you're creating value for your clients, without, adding too much extra responsibility on yourself and your team. So that's sort of the end of my spiel. And
yeah. I'm curious, so you talked about using Lawmatics, I know you have access to Clio, but I'm curious about what is the tech stack that you're using, and do you feel like you've got it right?
Yeah, so for me, I use Lawmatics for a lot of different things, and I also use Typeform.
Okay.
One of the, so for me, especially when it comes to like gathering feedback, Lawmatics is kind of like functions as a client management system for me. Everything's kind of in one place. I know Clio, same sort of thing. Like, you can create the forms so that when things are filled out, the information comes in through the form and goes directly into your system the way that you have it set up. And so, you can kind of really tailor that to like what you're looking for. I also use Typeform because it gives me a little bit more capability in terms of like what the form looks like, and also like taking into consideration like a little bit of the psychology for someone who's like might be filling out the form. Like, so like what does it look like, or like how many questions do they see at a time, and how that might impact their willingness to sort of continue moving through the form. And then I have someone who, I do refer to, who helps me with like kind of connecting those sort of things and making sure that they speak, right? So when someone submits a response through Typeform, it can go directly into Lawmatics and sort of feed in that way. But those are probably the two biggest pieces of software that I use. I may, as we kind of talk through more questions, think of more stuff. But
I'm sure. I think we all use more tech than I think we assume in our heads about how much tech we use. But I'm curious, you, as somebody who's getting better at using data to help inform how I do my job at Clio specifically, I'm curious about how you take that data. Like, how often are you looking at it? Do you review it all in Lawmatics and then decide like quarterly or every 6 months how you're going to use that feedback? I'm curious about what do you do with it now that you have it?
Yeah, so it's evolved. So like I'll say when I started doing this, I would get that like anonymous feedback through like Google Forms. So like, that just like, what is the NPS score, that general feedback. I would get it through like, a Google form, and then, that could put it into like a spreadsheet, and then I could create graphs if I wanted to, whatever the case may be. So like that process looks similar. It's just in Typeform now, but creating those graphs, and, I'll look at it like maybe once a month if I'm, like, depending on life. Yeah.
So I'm assuming it's more like once every 2 months.
Yeah. I mean, it honestly, like it might be like once a quarter, but really, when it kind of like pops into my mind, and, it doesn't have to be something where you're like, I have to look at this on the, 6th of every month. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. It's there. It's not going anywhere. And I think as long as you're kind of checking in on it periodically, the key is that after a while, you'll start to recognize some of those patterns. And then it's, what are you doing from there to kind of like, in response to some of the patterns that you're recognizing to kind of get better.
My last question, and then I want to toss it out to them, is you started this conversation with, for those of us who are bold enough to innovate and try new things, and I'm really curious about what is something that you've tried on the topic of gathering feedback and taking it into account. What's something that you've tried that you thought was innovative, that you're proud of, or that really worked for you?
So one of the things that's really worked for me is, and this is like specific to my practice, but, I think working with small business owners, particularly solopreneurs, like my business model looks a lot different than like the typical business/corporate lawyer, where they're looking to, find a big fish and sort of do as much work for them as possible in order to pay the bills. My business model is find as many little fish and do as many sort of like limited engagement things as I can, and have that practice be really predictable in terms of like what I do, how much I charge for it, and make sure that it's delivering value to, enough people that I'm going to have enough clients coming through the door. So in that context, one of the things that I do is helping people set up, LLCs, that sort of thing. And it's like, in this day and age, like a lot of people are comfortable just saying, well, I'll just go to LegalZoom, or I'll go to Taylor Brands or whatever the case may be to get my LLC set up. So recognizing that early on, it's like, what can I do to sort of stand out from that? What is the differentiating factor between me and just like going to LegalZoom and doing it? Because the reality is you can go through LegalZoom and set up an LLC and your business might be fine. But it's a give and take, right? You're paying less and that's an advantage, but you're getting less as well. And what does that look like for clients? And so, one of the things that I did to sort of address that was, instead of just saying, well, I'll set up your LLC and I'll, draft an operating agreement for you, I'll provide, kind of a whole wraparound package of like LLC formation, like things to just help you get started, right? So in addition to setting up the LLC, helping you with drafting your operating agreement, you'll get a 45-minute consultation where you'll get to start establishing a relationship with a lawyer who is your lawyer, rather than just like, I reach out to LegalZoom, they'll set me up with a 30-minute consultation. I spend 5 to 10 minutes explaining my situation and who I am and what I'm looking to do. And the next 20 minutes is the lawyer telling me, well, I can't do that right now. That would cost extra. So building that relationship, because that's really where the value is, and that expertise and that relationship that you're building. And then also offering, like, in addition to that, like a contract review or a trademark search or a bundle of essential contract templates that you can come back and we can talk about how these fit into your business. So it's really just like adding that lawyer to your team. And so that's something that's been successful for me in terms of like differentiating myself and being able to say to folks when they reach out, you might want to go with the LegalZoom, but if it's important for you to have someone on your team who you can turn to answer these questions moving forward so that you have clarity, then you're going to want to invest a little bit more to work with me.
No, that's really great. Yesterday we heard from Kevin Buckley, who talked a lot about this idea of you're most successful when you understand the life cycle that your client is going through. And that's exactly what you were just describing, is really understanding not just, oh, you need an LLC, here you go. But here's the bundle of services that you might need, and I'm on your team, and I'm here to help and support you. And so that's such a beautiful thing. So I love hearing that. But I want to see, does anybody in the audience, because I have more questions, but I want to hear what you all have, if you have any questions for Zane or myself. Oh my gosh, the lights are so bright. Hi.
Hi. Zane, I really liked your formula, the experience minus expectation equals satisfaction. One thing that I struggle with in my own practice is how to land this sale, but also not inflate expectations, because I find that giving the client optimism and hope, especially in family law, which is my practice field, is really important to landing the sale. And then also, because I don't have everything within my control, I don't want, I suppose, to overpromise. And so I'm wondering if you have some tips to deal with that and manage client expectations.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, one, it's really helpful to have like a script in mind. So one of the things that I did actually relatively recently, because I've really been making a push, I've always recognized that, like, in your business, when you're a solopreneur, when you own a firm or you own a business of any type, it's important to kind of have like those SOPs, but it's always been something where it's like, I'll get to it. So one of the things that I've done in the past year is really make an effort to get that stuff in writing. And it's been really helpful for me to kind of get in writing, like, what am I selling, and, how do I talk to people about what I can offer and what the value is. And I think having that script helps you not to kind of go overboard in terms of talking about, what you're selling and what you might be able to deliver. So I think that the script is helpful in that respect. But I think the other thing too is just like having the mindset of, clients and prospective clients really do appreciate transparency and authenticity and honesty. And they respect you as an attorney and as an expert in the law. And so if you tell them, like, either like, I don't have the answer for that right now, or I can't tell you how this is going to turn out, 9 times out of 10, they're going to respect and understand that and appreciate the fact that, you told them what the reality is versus kind of overselling or overpromising and putting them in a position where they might end up disappointed. And for the, 1 out of 10 clients who don't appreciate that you didn't give them the answer that they want to hear, they're probably not the folks that you want to work with anyway, because, you know, you might end up in a situation where you've just got someone who, no matter what, you can't please them unless you give them what you want. We work in a field where we can't always give clients, you know, exactly the outcome that they want. It's not always just dependent upon, you know, things that are in our control. There are things that are outside of our control, especially, you know, within the field that you're in. So I think just having the mindset as well of like, you know, I can tell the client that, you know, right now, I don't know how this is going to turn out, or, you know, we'll have to see how that might turn out. But, you know, here is, you know, another sort of selling point, or, you know, here's how we're going to manage that, even though right now we might not have the answer for you. I think that that's a good way to sort of approach that sort of situation.
What you just described at the end is just reframing the expectation. Yeah. That's really what that is. And so, sorry, I'm in sales, so this is what I do a lot. So reframing the expectation to not be around, I want 50% custody, I want this specific outcome, and helping to reframe that expectation to something that is reasonable, but also is lightening, especially in family laws. If they're going through any sort of conflict or dispute, whatever you can do to reframe the expectation around that lightening of pressure, of conflict, or whatever it is that's important to them, instead of making it about a very specific outcome, that can help incredibly, especially in high conflict situations too. So that's my 2 cents from the peanut gallery. Any other questions? So one of the things, while you all are thinking about it, one of the things that I also wanted to ask was, for those of us who have practice, and I did for a little bit of time, we all make all the well-intentioned mistakes as we go. So as we're trying to improve our client experiences and try to increase their client satisfaction, I'm curious about what were one or some pitfalls that you made at the beginning as you've been going for setting up your own practice, and how could folks like us avoid them in the future?
Yeah, there's probably so many different mistakes that I made. I think kind of along the lines of what I said before, of like starting out like a generalist, like just trying to do it all. And this might not be relevant for all of you, but I think if you're a solo in particular, like just trying to do too much. And even if you're a small firm, like really focusing in on like, what can I do really well? Like what's the least amount of stuff that I can do and focus on and still deliver the value that kind of like sets me apart. If you can really like figure out that formula, that's like, you know, you're golden at that point. I think another thing is, you know, along the lines of the question that was just asked, really learning to become comfortable, like saying like, I don't have the answer. And I think especially as an attorney, I think there is kind of this expectation that like, you just know everything about the law. And there are a lot of folks, especially if you're like a solo or a small firm, and a lot of us work with everyday people, right? We're the attorneys that are like helping people solve everyday legal problems. And so those folks who maybe haven't worked with an attorney before have this expectation that like, I'll ask the attorney the question and the attorney is just going to have the answer. So getting comfortable saying to clients like, either I don't have the answer for that, or I'm not the right person to answer that. So that down the line, you know, there's no like awkward conversation around like, okay, you know, I know that I said that, you know, I thought we could do this, but we actually need to like kind of like pivot, and I need to talk to this person or bring this person in, and, you know, kind of feeling like I'm pulling a surprise out on the client or something like that. So, those are just a couple of them, but yeah, I could probably go on.
It comes back to those expectations too, right? Like this is where this is my bread and butter, where I help, and things that might be on the margins, I'm going to loop in other experts, right? And that's a great way to keep it. Oh, I think we have time for one more? Is that okay? Yeah.
So obviously client communications are the things that it's the most important, I think, personally. But everyone has these clients that send us 2-page emails, and I send them 2-sentence responses as a way to communicate to them that I don't have time for 2 pages. But I imagine they would be upset with that. So, and then the kind of related question is just how to deal with the volume of emails that we get. So if you could address both of those things because they're important for meeting our ethical responsibilities as well as keeping a client happy. But sometimes we can't meet those expectations because they're unreasonable.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that Jessica mentioned just about sort of reframing is a great way to kind of like, it's one, managing the expectations, but really helping to reset the expectations as well, and like continue to reinforce like where the boundary lines are so that like clients get it and they understand what's reasonable. And that like me telling you, that like this isn't the best way for us to address this. There's like another avenue for us to do that, or another way we can schedule a call, next week, or this isn't an emergency. So let's schedule a call next week and talk through it. And, here's why it isn't an emergency, reframing. But also I think when you get to that point where you're recognizing like the patterns in terms of like, when clients are like sending you those emails or which clients are sending you those emails, designing like pathways essentially, to kind of like funnel those questions or those concerns into a space where it makes it manageable for you. So again, like whether it's like, saying like, okay, prior to this hearing, we're going to schedule a consultation. Every question that you have, write down all those questions and we'll go over them during this call, right? So then rather than a client feeling like I have to get the answer to this question now because I don't know when I'll get the answer to this question, it's like, oh, we're meeting in 2 weeks. I can just jot this down and get the answer then. So really kind of designing a pathway and a process that kind of helps the client navigate the situation in a way that works for you as well.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for coming to our session. And again, huge thanks to you, Zane, for your presentation and for all of the content. So thank you all so much. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon here at CleoCon, and I expect to see some of you at After Dark. So thank you all so much.